Look, I don't think Trump is fit to be president. I've said that for a long time. It's very bad news for the United States and all of its friends around the world that we're going through this now. We're going to emerge with a lot of damage done to our relationships. Trump is ripping through decades of goodwill, good faith, reliance, trust.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had former National Security Advisor John Bolton on the show. He's reacted to this Signal group chat leak, what it means, what he would do if he was still in this role, how you actually handle these sensitive meetings, and the fact that they would never be done over a group chat. So we've spoken to him about the people working in Trump's cabinet, whether they're fit for the role, whether Donald Trump is fit for the role. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube. John Bolton, a former National Security Advisor under the Trump administration. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you.
Well, it's good timing having you on the show after a big week of national security scandals. The big story, of course, this week with this Signal group leak chat with journalist Jeff Goldberg, of course, added to this small group of senior Trump officials discussing war plans in Yemen. Now, in your professional career, have you ever seen a situation like this?
No, it's very hard to understand how the Signal group ever got put together. The U.S. has spent billions of dollars over decades to build what we hope is the world's most secure telecommunications system across all the mediums, sound, voice, data. And every one of the people essentially on that group chat, secretaries of defense and State, the National Security Advisor, the Director of National Intelligence, Director of the CIA, all are never more than an arm's length away from secure communications over the government channel. So why you have to go to a commercial platform, which conceitedly is encrypted while in transmission, but which governments around the world spend billions of dollars trying to de-encrypt each other, and certainly could do the same to Signal. Not to mention the fact that in their phones, in their computers, the non-governmental instruments, that they could have been hacked into already, and adversaries could get the same information directly out of their devices. So the whole thing makes no sense to me whatever, and I still don't have an explanation from anybody why it got started. What worries me is this was not the first time they did this. It didn't look like this was a new experience for them, which raises the question, well, what else have they done over Signal in the past 2 months, and how much damage has that caused?
Absolutely, John. It does raise that question. If they hadn't have been caught, would they still be using Signal or other platforms to be discussing this highly sensitive information, or what were they doing before? So what are the kind of situations that would worry you in the last few months since this Trump administration was sworn in? What would the situations be that would worry you that they were discussing on the chats?
Well, everything having to do with Ukraine, which obviously is in a very potentially a turning point now. I'm very much worried it's a turning point for the worse, but a huge amount of activity over opening negotiations between Ukraine and the Russians, dealing with European allies and NATO, talking about how to proceed, all of which is extraordinarily sensitive. It's not necessarily information derived from intelligence, or it's not necessarily military information. Diplomatic and political information can be highly sensitive and therefore classified. Anything dealing with the Middle East, with Iran, the nuclear program, the terrorist proxies that Israel has been fighting, just enormously significant for everybody involved. And then, what China is thinking and doing about Taiwan and other potential targets in the Far East. We're in a very dangerous period internationally, and so this has come in the context of trying to open the Red Sea maritime passage from the Houthi-Iran effort to close it. That's important, but you can see just by definition, it's only a piece of a much bigger picture. So that's why this question, how much has gone out over Signal since Inauguration Day, is a huge one we don't have an answer to yet.
And it is worrying, John, because you did see in that language there was never an opening message that said, hey, Hey guys, I'm moving this discussion into Signal for the first time. You know, it was done, it seemed like it was a normal thing to be grabbing everyone into a group discussion. But as so many experts have pointed out, even when you've got a group of senior officials traveling abroad or in different parts of the country, there are mechanisms and safety nets in which they can discuss these highly sensitive things on, right?
Yeah, as I say, if in case of everybody on that list, except maybe Steve Witkoff, and I don't know why he was on the list to begin with, but for everybody else, they've got access to secure telecommunications, video, and regular, from a regular telephone set. When they travel, most of them use military air for security reasons. They always have secure communications in the air. Their cars, which are generally driven, in my case, by the Secret Service when I was there, other protective services have secure telephones in the car. The idea that somehow it's regularly inconvenient to get to a secure mode of communication is just simply false. The real place to hold these kinds of discussions is in the Situation Room in the basement of the White House. If you can't be there physically, you get on a secure video telecommunications system link, and you do participate. If any of these people had something more important to discuss over those days than the U.S. possibly taking military action against terrorists in the Middle East, I'd sure like to know what it was that they couldn't inconvenience themselves to get to a secure phone. Very hard to understand.
So if you were still in your role as the National Security Advisor, John, and you were needing this group of government officials to meet to discuss bombing Houthis in Yemen, that would be the situation. You would go into the Situation Room and discuss this. There would never be a scenario from your experience in this role where you would be turning to a group chat.
No, and I'm not saying that to put myself in a better position than people who did it. I have to confess, it just simply never would have occurred to me. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of it, rejected it. I just never thought of it. Even the way the thing is set up, where Mike Waltz says, "Let me know your point of contact for meetings of the Deputies Committee meeting." I didn't understand that. There's a Deputies Committee meeting that exists from the inception of every new administration. It consists of the deputy secretaries of the cabinet departments. That's the point of contact if the cabinet secretary isn't there. So it also, I think, shows just general disorganization in the new administration. Not surprising to me. It was that way much of the time in the first Trump term. Things obviously haven't gotten better in Trump's decision-making process and may have gotten much worse.
And you did obviously work in the first administration, John, but does it seem to you the way that Donald Trump is running this second administration that he's kind of throwing protocol out the window and running it in a way that he thinks is fit for him?
Yeah, I think what's happened is what he learned in the first term is that there are too many people with opinions and facts and alternatives and new options that he'd rather not hear. And the traditional role of the National Security Advisor is make sure the president has all the pertinent information necessary to make an informed decision on issue X, whatever it is, present the options, the recommendations of his top advisors. So the president's going to make the final decision. There isn't any question about that. But you want the president to be able to make the best informed decision, weighing the pros and cons, and that's what he does. That's not what's going on here. The whole chain of text messages back and forth read as though the president said, "We're going to attack the Houthis," and by the way, I have absolutely no problem with that as an outcome. Should have done it long ago. But the president makes the decision, then they start talking about whether it's a good idea or how should we do it. J.D. Vance, the vice president, basically says he doesn't think the president understands what his decision means. Let Vance explain that to Trump someday. But those are the kinds of conversations you have before the decision is made, not after it's made.
John, there's so much kind of discussion over whether there will be any repercussions for Trump's team, whether there will be any firings, whether there'll be any slaps on the wrist. But then there's also the argument that the only way Donald Trump would publicly condemn someone in his own cabinet is if it reflects poorly on him, if he finds that Americans are starting to blame him for it. So Do you think that behind closed doors, Donald Trump did actually slap his cabinet members on the wrist and get them in trouble for this kind of lack of awareness and putting American militants at such risk?
Well, he should have, that's for sure. I mean, it is absolutely correct to say until Trump feels he's taking heat for this, that he's suffering political damage, I don't think anybody is at risk here of being fired or anything like that. But I do think for making the misjudgment that started a week's worth of bad publicity for the administration, even if for not Trump personally, that he's got second thoughts about some of these people. I mean, he said a few days ago, everything was perfect for the first 2 months. Admittedly, that's not what everybody else would think, but he thought it was perfect, and now for a week it hasn't been perfect. So there are going to be consequences for that. As I say, until Trump himself feels heat, which I don't think he is at the moment, we won't see them anytime soon.
Are you worried about these appointments in his senior cabinet, John? Because we know that Mike Waltz has experience in government roles. He worked for Dick Cheney, he worked for Bush, he was a congressman. But then you have people like Steve Witkoff, you have people like Pete Hegseth in these very high up roles with not a lot of experience. Do you think that he's starting to see the negativity, especially even with Elon Musk, the negativity of hiring people without the experience to back them?
Yeah, I think some of that is beginning to come through. There are polls that indicate the dissatisfaction with Musk, for example, and the way he's proceeding. We have seen finally some Republicans in Congress taking a stand different from Trump's. Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, very, very important figure in Congress in national security matters, said unequivocally the information in the Signal group chat was classified. So it's mounting, but it's not at a critical mass yet.
What was your reaction to Roger Wicker going against his own party and saying that there needs to be an investigation into why members of Trump's team are using a Signal group chat to discuss such sensitive material?
Well, I don't think he's going against the party in Congress. I think overwhelmingly they think this was a terrible mistake. What they're afraid to do, unfortunately, is to speak up publicly. And I think what Wicker did was say, I'm willing to go forward. And everybody said, that's great, Roger. We're with you 100%. They just don't want to say it publicly themselves. But this is how it begins. It's an opening crack. It's not the end of the Trump administration. But I think we're beginning to see evidence that there have been political consequences for the Republican Party out with the voters that they're beginning to reflect could hurt them, and they're seeing it in Washington. For example, yesterday the president withdrew Elise Stefanik's nomination to be UN ambassador, one of my old jobs. It was a congresswoman from upstate New York. She could run for that seat forever, I think, and hold it, but her departure would have meant a vacancy that required a special election, a by-election in your terms. And I think they were worried that Republicans might have lost it. So with a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives, 220 to 215, they can't afford to lose any seats. We've got two special elections coming up on Tuesday, both in Florida, very, very Republican districts. But people are nervous. I think Republicans will win both of them, but it could be by a very close margin. So as members of Congress see their own jobs on the line, nothing to sharpen a politician's attention like the possibility of losing.
Well, I do wonder how the public perceived this situation, John, because we saw Hillary Clinton tweet saying, you've got to be kidding me, which I thought was quite funny, of course, because Donald Trump was constantly attacking her during the 2016 presidential campaign about her use of private email servers when it came to discussing government information when she was the Secretary of State. So a YouGov poll indicated that Americans found the Signal chat to be more serious than the Clinton email scandal. So I wonder, do you think Americans would be looking at Donald Trump and think he's just contradicted himself?
Yeah, look, this is a question of if the phrase double standard applies. I mean, I wrote back in 2015 and 2016 op-eds and articles very, very critical of Hillary Clinton for how the email thing was handled. When it happens in your own party, you need to be equally critical. If you always allow this sort of thing to become a partisan matter, the national security is going to suffer. This is not a question about Democratic security or Republican security. It's national security. So I hope Republicans stand up. The Democrats have been attacking Trump, but honestly, their performance on Capitol Hill in the last 2 months, it's like an EKG graph that's gone flatline. It's hard to know where they are on any given day.
100%. I couldn't have, I've never seen the Democrats more quiet, John, but I want to get into this response from the White House because it was quite wishy-washy, and in an attempt to avoid any condemnation, we had them admitting that it happened, but then saying that no war plans were discussed. I'm going to read out a few tweets for you. We saw Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt tweet, "The Atlantic has conceded these were not war plans. The entire story was another hoax written by a Trump hater who is well known for his sensationalist spin," followed by Mike Waltz tweeting that no locations, no sources and methods, no war plans. Foreign partners had already been notified that the strikes were imminent. Now, what is your response to this, John? Were war plans discussed?
Well, at the Pentagon, the phrase war plan has a very specific meaning. It's a broad conceptual document prepared in advance, contingency. They're prepared country by country. Each plan has a number. Some countries are blessed with multiple war plans because there are particular problems. That's obviously not what was in this chat. But I don't think the Atlantic probably knew what the buzz phrase war plans meant at the Pentagon. This was very sensitive information about upcoming U.S. military strikes that hadn't happened yet. Anytime you're talking even about the fact of a strike coming, if it falls into your adversary's hands, is enormously important. It gives them advance warning that they can take whatever appropriate measures they're going to take. And I think that's what really makes it continuingly hard, if not impossible, to understand why you would ever do this. Even that general idea that they're considering an attack on the Houthis is valuable information, let alone some of the specifics. There's a story in a major American newspaper today where they went out and interviewed fighter pilots, just in general, to say, what did you think about this story, since they, F-18 pilots and others, could have been put at risk over Yemen, and they're livid about it. They see their Secretary of Defense putting out information in an unclassified medium that could have endangered their colleagues' lives.
Well, what would have been, as a former national security advisor, John, you've spent a lot of time kind of weighing up worst possible situations, the scenarios that could happen. So had this chat been leaked at the time of the planning to bomb Houthis in Yemen, or foreign agents were able to hack into this chat at the time, what would the worst case possible scenario have been?
Well, if the Houthis had the capability, if they knew F-18s or other U.S. planes were on the way, they could have prepared their air defenses. They could have moved them to more advantageous locations. They would have had more time to get ready, and our pilots could have been put in real jeopardy. But let me just say, even after the raid's over, and it was a success and there weren't any casualties, that doesn't mean the leak was okay. It's not a no harm, no foul situation, because the risk alone is why you keep things classified. And now that all this is out in the public domain, and there's no doubt in my mind that and other information was classified. No doubt. This is not a serious argument to say it's not classified. Now our adversaries can look at all that, and that tells them how that particular strike went. But it gives them information that fit into all of the other things they've picked up by intelligence and observation about how the U.S. conducts strikes like this. This is now very hard evidence that they can put into their own planning to say, this is the way the Americans do things. Okay, this is how we're going to get ready to defend against them. That's serious business.
I saw Tommy Lahren, the conservative commentator, John. She actually kind of went against the White House's inability, I guess, to own up to this. She tweeted that regarding the whole signal debate, the administration really needs to come out and explicitly say they effed up. The word gymnastics is making it worse. There's that old saying in politics that you never say when you're wrong, but I wonder in this scenario if it would do them a good thing to own up that this was not a good idea.
Yeah, look, a lot of Republicans have said this was a mistake, and what they ought to do is own up to it, say, okay, we made a mistake, it's not going to happen again. Here's what the problem with that is. It goes to the question of how many times in the last 2 months have they used Signal or some other non-secure channel to have these conversations. If it was a one-time thing, then that'd be a circumstance where you could say, okay, bad mistake, we've learned from it. But if you've been doing it for 2 months, it's pretty hard to say, well, we're going to own up to it only after we got caught. And I think that's another piece of evidence supporting the proposition they've been doing this right along, which means now we have to weigh how much other information might have been compromised. Remember, just because one of your enemies gets sensitive information doesn't necessarily mean they act on it immediately. They hold back to keep that channel open because clearly important stuff is coming through and they don't want to compromise it. They don't want to reveal that they've breached these kinds of discussions. So right now we need a real counterintelligence review of this. I don't think we're going to get it, at least as of now. We'll see if Wicker's request, along with Jack Reed, the ranking Democrat on Senate Armed Services, if the Defense Department Inspector General can come up with something. I'm not holding my breath. I do think it'll take a congressional investigation if someone will get one started.
Do you think that Pete Hegseth should be apologising to US militants for putting them at such risk, especially as a former member of the Army himself?
Yeah, look, he knows how sensitive this stuff is. They all do, except maybe Tulsi Gabbard and Steve Witkoff and people, as I say, I don't even know why they're in this conversation. The Vice President should certainly know. And the director of the CIA, really the keeper of the secrets, should know too. So they can try and bluff their way through this one, but if there is a history going back to Inauguration Day or other things that are out there, you can bet reporters are looking for it right now.
In a response to a lawsuit filed by the non-profit watchdog American Oversight, Judge James Boasberg, not Trump's biggest fan, vice versa, has ordered Trump's officials involved in this Signal scandal to basically preserve all the messages they have in that chat between March 11 and the 15th, so a few days before the bombing occurred. Do you think this is a sign that the judge does believe that these officials could have violated the Federal Records Act?
Yeah, pretty clearly, the very poor substitute for using a regular government system is if somebody sends you an email on your private email and you respond to them. You're supposed to send those emails into the government system so they can be recorded. This is a very technical violation, but it could indicate that there are other things worth investigating. I don't know how Signal works that well myself, but can you send direct messages from Mike Waltz to Pete Hegseth without the other members of the group? I assume you can. Are those records going to be preserved? That could be interesting too, because this is, even if this was the first time, if they're using a non-secure, non-governmental channel of communication for one-on-one communication, that could be even more damaging.
Just in terms of where we're at in US national security, John, now, to paint the picture for anyone watching this, it's been a bizarre few weeks in terms of national security. So we had 3 weeks ago, Pete Hegseth ordering a halt in all offensive cyber operations against Russia. Now that kind of raised alarm bells to me, especially when it comes to the use of Signal group chat. We saw the White House last week accidentally leaking 200 individuals' social security numbers in a rush to get these JFK files publicized. And then, of course, now we've seen these very senior members of Trump's cabinet discuss war plans on a group chat that could have easily been hacked. We don't know if it has been, but it could have easily been hacked. So just the combination of these things happening in these first few months of Trump's administration, where do you think they're at in terms of national security?
Well, I don't think Trump cares very much about this whole security makeup. I mean, this goes back to the transition in 2016 after his first election. I heard from people working there that he would be given intelligence briefings and told what the classification was and what it meant, and it didn't register on him. It's not something he cares about. What he cares about is himself being embarrassed or put in a difficult position, and I think the possibility of that is very real. This is far from over, and indeed many of the comments Trump's made in the past 4 or 5 days are intended to give him distance from, for example, Michael Waltz. He said the other evening, but Mike took full responsibility for it. If you have a question, ask Mike, meaning I don't know anything about it. So I think this remains to be played out. If more information comes out again about repeated use of signal, not just this one time, but other uses, I think the pressure could become intense. It has not yet, but it could be.
Do you think that Donald Trump and his team are incompetent when it comes to national security, John? Because even those comments saying, I don't know anything about it, I think if you're the president of the United States, you kind of have to say you know about everything.
Yeah, look, I give Waltz credit for saying I'm responsible. He set the group up. Somehow the editor of Atlantic got on it. So at least he tried that. But then they've been backing away from that, saying, well, somehow maybe Jeffrey Goldberg snuck his way onto it. I don't know enough about Signal to say whether that has any prospect of being true or not. But they know, you can tell from their behavior, they know this was a big mistake. They know they've caused harm, and there's already some finger pointing going on, which is further indication that there may be more there that we don't know about.
But do you think the White House is just banking on the fact that this might just kind of wash away with a news cycle?
Sure, that's Trump's usual approach, and so he's now launched tariffs on automobiles, 25% on import. Just if you wait a minute, the weather will change in Washington, and Trump's very good at that. But this is one, I think this has struck a bell with the American people. They understand. Many of them have been in the military. They remember, at least from parents or grandparents, about how loose lips sink ships. This is not something that makes them feel good, and the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be.
John, earlier in the week we saw Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East special envoy, sit for an interview with Tucker Carlson. He made some pretty startling comments, and I wanted to get your reaction to them. He said that he didn't consider Putin to be a very bad guy. He considered him to be super smart, and he doesn't believe Putin wants to advance into other European countries. What was your reaction to that?
Look, Witkoff knows nothing about history, Russia, the Soviet Union, Ukraine, the Middle East, the Far East, Yemen, or much else. He's a Manhattan real estate dealer too. That's what they do up there, I guess. And he's so really uninformed that he's become a vehicle for Putin's propaganda. Putin has met with him for hours on 2 separate occasions. And my guess is, knowing Putin, that Putin did most of the talking and told him what Russia's version of reality was, and he simply transmitted it back to Trump. It's an incredible circumstance, and I think it's dangerous for the country that somebody so inexperienced has such obviously a critical role in so many different national security issues.
But this seems to be Trump's shtick, John, hiring people with not experience in their area. Even Donald Trump, as we know, is a real estate mogul turned president.
Yeah, well, it's as I say, he thinks international affairs are summed up by the personal relationships between leaders. He doesn't know much, he doesn't learn much, he doesn't care about that, because it's all in whether he can make a deal with Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or whomever it may be. But this adds up over time, and the Russians, who are expert at manipulating what Vladimir Lenin once called useful idiots, know what they've got here, and they're working on it. It's very serious for Ukraine, and I'm worried it's very serious for NATO, because Putin's objectives right at the moment extend beyond consolidating his position in Ukraine. He'd like to use these coming negotiations to force redeployments, restructurings of NATO itself. And I'm worried he has an attentive audience in Witkoff and Trump.
Well, that term "useful idiots," John, it's been flying around headline everywhere. But I want to get your take on it. Do you think that idiots are running the United States currently?
Look, I don't think Trump is fit to be president. I've said that for a long time. It's very bad news for the United States and all of its friends around the world that we're going through this now. We're going to emerge with a lot of damage done to our relationships. Trump is ripping through decades of goodwill, good faith, reliance, trust that the U.S. and its friends have built up, and that can all be rebuilt, but it's not going to be easy, and the memory of the damage that Trump has done will live on long after his presidency. But I think we've all got to kind of grit our teeth, try and mitigate the damage in the next 46 months, and then work as hard as we can afterward to repair it.
And just hope that no constitution has changed, so his term finishes.
That will not happen. That I am sure of.
John Bolton, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you.